Very theoretical, all this. Oscar, I thought you were just gonna tell me which sound card to buy and whether or not I should get started on modular synthesizers. Well, I wish there was a simpler answer, but this is the answer. If you can answer these questions, then you're there, okay? So... The year is 2026 and you're thinking about starting electronic music production. What gear should you get? What school should you go to? Get a lot of questions from beginners, and I want to reframe this topic completely. What I want to do, if you're thinking of starting electronic music production, I want to give you 3 questions to answer. And depending on your answer, you might go a totally different route into electronic music. And I also want to give you 2 mistakes that I think I made, sort of things that I look back on and I go, oh wow, wouldn't my path have been different, maybe better, if I hadn't made those mistakes? So let's start with the 3 questions you need to ask yourself. Question number 1, what are your intentions? Another way of asking that question might be, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to get from this? What do you want this process to feel like? What kind of activities do you want this kind of process to be made up of? People get into this area for very different reasons, and your reasons for getting into it completely dictate which avenues are going to be most interesting to you. For example, some common intentions that I might see are, I'm a DJ and I would like to be able to make the type of music that I play in my sets, but I'd like to make it myself. That kind of an intention will most likely lead you into the kind of a route where we're inside of Ableton on the arrangement view, composing music very much on a timeline with the idea of then rendering that out and playing it in a DJ set. Another intention might be that you are an instrumentalist and you have an instrument and you would like to expand the scope of that instrument. So you would like to have more tools for recording and layering and transforming your instrument in a way that is playful to you. In contrast to the first intention, if you go down this route, what you might end up is you might end up using Ableton only as a tape recorder in a way, and you might be running your instruments through some hardware effects or something like that. Another intention might be that you just want to jam and relax away from a computer screen. That's also totally valid, and that might set you down a route of completely ignoring the DAW, ignoring Ableton Live, and going for some hardware gear instead. A totally different intention and a totally different set of tools and processes. Maybe your intention is to perform live in front of other people. Maybe your intention is to jam with other musicians. There's so many ways of coming at music that it could be worth just stopping for yourself and really clarifying it in your head. Why are you doing this? The next question that you have to ask yourself is, what is your context? What are your tools? And what are your resources? This is where it starts to get concrete and you need to start doing some research and some mind mapping of, okay, do I have all the elements that I need to be able to pursue this choice? I could try to give you some blanket advice about gear, but it's never really going to be good. Like, for example, if you don't have any electronic music gear, a combo like this is pretty solid, where you have a little sound card, which means you can route instruments in and out of your computer, and some kind of a MIDI controller, maybe with keys, maybe with knobs, maybe with step sequencers. Also, having a good laptop with a good DAW installed on it is, like, I would say, pretty priceless. I would definitely make sure you have a laptop, and if you ask my personal opinion, I would go for a Mac in 2026. Some of the newer MacBooks are very budget friendly and the power of the computer is so much stronger than what you're ever going to need for audio, so that's fine. These are generally pretty versatile tools and it's always good to have them. However, every use case needs its own tools and it's up to you to figure out for your use case what the tools are. And when you're thinking about what tools to get, you're going to come up against the question of resources. Resources are time and money especially, but also access to education and access to community of other people who are doing this. So let's kind of go through them real quick. Time. How much time do you have to pursue this? This is going to influence later on what goals you're going to set. That's for question number 3. But it's good to clarify in your mind how many, let's say, hours a week can you set aside for this? And can you be consistent about this? Because everyone does this at their own tempo. And if you only have 30 minutes a week, then that's just what you have. And make sure that you set yourself up for having fun within those 30 minutes a week. If you have 8 hours, 20 hours a week, that's a completely different ball game, but it's good to clarify to yourself how much you have. Also money-wise, within electronic music, there is the potential to spend endless amounts of money, but it's a bit double. Many things can be done for a relatively low budget, for example, purely inside of Ableton, but sometimes a big investment can unlock something very tangible and very concrete. For example, upgrading my speakers and upgrading my acoustics has made an immeasurable difference, even though it was expensive. So, on the one hand, I would say be very budget conscious and be mindful of not just spending money because you have gear acquisition syndrome. And on the other hand, realize that some investment might be necessary, but just think it over well before you do. The third resource I mentioned is education, and I gotta be careful here because I'm biased. I am an electronic music school and I offer courses, so of course I'm gonna be like, oh, maybe one of the underdog courses is good for you. But music education is a complicated beast because there's a lot of different actors offering many different types of education that may or may not be a good fit for you. Some of them are very expensive and offer very little value for money. So again, it's hard to give generalized advice about this. My personal philosophy has been to generally sort of give a lot of music production concepts for free here on the YouTube channel, but in a sort of an unstructured way. And if you want to learn more systematically, then you go buy one of the courses where in the courses, every piece of knowledge builds on the previous knowledge so that at the end you have something that's kind of well-rounded without any holes in it. And maybe I can link this idea of education to the idea of community and maybe mentorship. Right? There's probably other people who are doing similar things to you nearby somewhere, especially if you're near one, like a big city. And I would say finding those people and contributing to that scene is a huge factor. So if there are jams or if there are parties or if is something, offer yourself as a positive contribution to that phenomenon, maybe as a volunteer or helping things out, or just be a positive, uplifting presence. Then you're going to get involved. You're going to see how other people in that scene are doing it. And that's going to give you some ideas on what kind of education, for example, to pursue and what kind of tools might be interesting to you. If you can find people there that you can bounce off in terms of enthusiasm, and they can either be your peers or your mentors if they're much further than you. Usually people who take this stuff seriously are pretty happy to talk about it forever. So get yourself in that position where you have community and exchange, and then you're going to just absorb a lot more knowledge much more quickly. If you don't have access to that, of course, keep exploring free resources like YouTube, etc., but realize that you might be missing some puzzle pieces of context-dependent knowledge, and that context comes from meeting the kind of people in your neighborhood who are doing really that kind of music that you enjoy. So tools, resources, time, money, education, community, those are the ingredients for the recipe. And then also inside of the recipe, you have the processes that you want to explore. And in terms of processes, the concept that I really want you to hold on to is no matter what your processes are, they need to center around a playfulness. And a playfulness means that you have a joy-based exploration of sonic experiences. So you use your tools to make sound, and within that, you're finding joy and playfulness. And allow that to be the core experience. Enjoy those sensations, the actual sensory pleasure that you get from the sounds that are coming out before you try to capture that and nail it down into a composition process. Because that could very well be the next step is to compose, right? But I would say the necessary previous step is playfulness. And that's something that a lot of music tutorials skip over, weirdly, right? I feel like a lot of music tutorials, they start from tools, and this is the kind of composition you can do with it. But there's this intermediate step, which is playful exploration, finding the things that excite you, and then later turning that into a composition. For those of you who may be familiar with my triangle method, that's basically a core part of it. And before we move on to the third question, I want to capture that moment where I talk about playfulness and repeat the importance of it. The sensation of exploring the sounds needs to be pleasurable, or it needs to be fun, or it needs to, at some point, encourage you to want more of that. So if it's only about discipline and engineering and logical forward movement, that motivation is probably going to dry up at some point pretty soon. So overall, however you design your journey, throughout all three of these layers, you're going to need to maintain a sense of fun and a sense of purpose. If either of those gets lost, then it doesn't matter how good your gear is, it doesn't matter how connected you are. If you just think of music production as like a why would I, then it doesn't matter if you have 10 minutes a week or 20 hours a week. If there's no sense of purpose, it's just going to fall out. So one thing you might experience is that people might, for example, have opinions on what tools they recommend to you. But if you get a sense that it would be less fun, then it's up to you to defend that. It's up to you to make sure that you maintain the sense of fun even if you're using a somewhat inferior tool or something like that. It's your life, it's your art, it's your emotion, so don't let anyone optimize that away. Very theoretical, all this. Oscar, I thought you were just gonna tell me which sound card to buy and whether or not I should get started on modular synthesizers. Well, I wish there was a simpler answer, but this is the answer. If you can answer these questions, then you're there, okay? So yes, it's dry and it's heavily context dependent, but this is the only way to give the most truthful response that I know. So let's keep going. So you've clarified your intentions, you've clarified your tools and your contexts. Now it would be great to clarify your goals and what your iterative process is going to be. So a goal could be, I'm going to make one track that I can play in a DJ set just at home, not even in front of a crowd. A goal could be, I just want to participate in a jam, even if I only play one note, I just want to participate in it. A goal might be, when I'm performing on stage next time with my voice, I want to be able to activate a foot switch and have a secondary timbre join my voice. Very concrete goal. Another goal might be, I want to do a whole album where I present myself as an artist and I want it to be very conceptual and I want to tell a whole story. Amazing. A goal might be, I want to do a museum installation that talks about a particular societal process and I want to digest that through an audio process and make an installation where people can walk through it and reflect deeply about climate change or about something. That's also a valid goal. But whatever your goal is, a goal is a thing that you latch on to organize your decision making in the present moment. You're like, okay, what decisions do I have to make now to achieve a goal? And depending on the size of your goal, it can feel overwhelming or it can feel like something you don't know how to even approach, right? And so I would encourage you to think in terms of iterations. Iterations just means doing the same process again, basically. So while you're preparing and while you're in the studio working or thinking or creating, you have a certain idea, a sort of a theory, almost like a scientific theory, right? Where you're like, I think it's going to work like this. And then once you achieve the goal, maybe you do a gig or a performance or you play something in a live setting, and it doesn't feel exactly how you thought it was going to feel. That's valuable information because you could never have known that without the experience of actually doing it. So once you're achieving a result, that's going to give you information for the next iteration. And that's a crucial part. There's no point in being perfectionist up front and saying, oh, I'm not going to do anything until I do it perfectly. That's just not how the world works, sadly. So what you need to do is you need to figure out what imperfect version of your goal you're going to achieve first, and then figure out how to do it better by doing it again and again and again and again. I guarantee you all the arts that you are touched by, like your favorite artist's best work, is just a tip of an iceberg of what they've actually done. They've probably done an infinite amount of work beforehand where they've iterated, and at some point something really worked in that process, that became famous, and then that's like, oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But they iterate. They didn't just do nothing until they achieved the perfection. They tried things out, saw what information they got from the result of doing it, and then went forward. And so all of that just to say, pretty long-winded way of saying, sorry. All of that just to say that set your goals, but think in terms of iteration. How can I not let the perfect be the enemy of the good? And with enough iteration, even really, really big goals are possible. So it becomes almost a cascade of smaller goals. Imagine this is you here, and here you see yourself headlining a music festival where you're playing 5 different instruments on stage as your artist persona. Holy moly, how do you create an iterative process to get there? Well, okay, once you've had this vision, you have a sleepless night one night and angels talk to you and they say, okay, this is where you want to get to. All right, let's go. Then let's make an iterative process. Let's say first you need to learn one instrument and do a live performance with that. That's a goal that could be broken down into several different steps, and maybe you can find an open mic night where you're able to just perform your piece. You do this for 3 different instruments. You then figure out how to perform multiple of them on stage. You release an album where that multi-instrumental thing is your whole shtick, and then before you know it, you're there. Easy peasy. At university, I remember meeting a civic engineer in his first year, and he described something that one of his teachers had said. He said, as a civic engineer, our job is to take a big problem and turn it into a series of small problems, and small problems is not for you to solve. Those you delegate to other people. But that's how a civic engineer would achieve a big goal. So you turn a big goal into a series of small goals, all of which are achievable. And over time, that's going to help you achieve the big goal. It might also seem crazy to have a big goal like this, but it can help because it motivates you to do all of these movements. And maybe once you're here, you're going to realize that that wasn't the goal anyway. Once you are here, maybe you realize, this other route is more interesting. Or this other route is more interesting, because you'll have so much more information and you might realize that there's something about this that you don't like, but you might have discovered something along the way that really gets you going. But having that original big goal helps you make decisions and get you the gas in your tank to get underway. But I said 3 questions, 2 mistakes. Let's get to the mistakes. Let's get to the saucy part. Let's get to the part where I get to say I was wrong. Let's talk about 2 mistakes that I made that I think cost me heavily, that I just didn't have the privilege of understanding upfront. First mistake I would say is not immersing yourself enough. You see, there's a lot of music out there. There's a lot of people doing music, and that's wonderful and that's beautiful. And drink as deeply from that river as you can, because it's going to teach you so much about what you like and what you don't like and what moves you in a certain way. Making music without context is fun and exciting to a certain extent, but it can be so much more motivating if you know really what's going on in the community around you and you can contribute to it in a more concrete way. Seeing how other people's art affects you also fills up some kind of bucket in your heart that also helps you have visions for your own art and makes you understand, oh yeah, these are some of the options that I could take for my own art. Like a very concrete example might be the fact that when I was, 21 or something, I started trying to produce techno, trying to participate in the phenomenon of techno. But it took me until I was in my mid-30s to finally go to Berghain in Berlin for the first time. And I know a lot of people have a lot of feelings about the door policy at Berghain, but the reality of the matter is that the experience that you get in there kind of sets the tone for almost every techno club in the world. Even if the techno club is doing something different, it kind of does it with knowledge of what Berghain is like. So since going there, that now informs my aesthetic vision of what techno can be. The type of techno that's played there, the sound system, the environment, just the aesthetic overall experience tells you so much. And so now when I'm producing and I have that in mind, I'm like, oh, that is a vision that I can now pursue. However, if I didn't have that vision, I couldn't pursue it. Let's take a totally different example. Imagine you were trying to get into playing guitar and guitar solos. It would be a good idea for you probably to watch as many guitar soloists as possible so that you can just see what's possible. And then their art is going to inform your art later. You're going to digest that, all the feelings that it gives you, then you can re-express some part of that through that. So in a nutshell, when you find an art medium that touches you, dive deep. Dive really deep. Figure out at the root, where does it come from? What are the artists that have shaped this medium? What are their references? What does this build on? And just get really, really obsessed about it. That's going to only do good things for the quality of your own art. So, immersing. The second mistake I would say is using inappropriate tools for the job. This mistake, I formulated it differently in an earlier draft of this, where I was saying I was listening through bad speakers for too long. I was trying to produce club-ready techno on systems that couldn't properly reproduce the frequencies necessary to understand what I was doing. And that really put me back an enormous amount. Concretely, I was working on Adam A7X speakers. Now I work on Adam S3V speakers. And what's happening around 40 to 50 hertz, now I can actually hear it. I can design a kick drum and say, I prefer that it goes more like that, or more like that, or more like that. What used to happen is that I used to produce on the small speakers, and then when I'd finally get to hear it on big speakers, I would be surprised. I'd be like, whoa, I didn't think it sounded like that. And that's very demotivating because it really removes the fun and the sense of purpose if you're just kind of doing things at random and you don't feel like you actually achieve a sort of predictably good result. So in an ideal world, I would have started producing techno directly on an amazing sound system to learn what that sounds like. And even then, maybe I'd be able to reproduce it on a smaller sound system. But the more generalized version of this mistake is using the wrong tools for the task. If you're searching for a particular timbre, but you're using the wrong kind of gear for that, it's just going to be an uphill, frustrating, demotivating battle. If all your musical heroes are using a certain combination of gear and you're trying to be cost efficient, so you're like, I can do all of this inside of Ableton, and then you try it, but it sounds a bit dead and lifeless, well, maybe there's something about the processes of that hardware that, enables the fun and the magic to happen. So this is a counterpoint to the budget resources thing. So while I certainly recommend that you stay budget conscious, I also say don't hesitate to invest in certain expensive pieces if they are crucial to the process. So that's it. 3 questions and 2 mistakes. What are your intentions? What are your tools and context? What goals can you set and how can you iterate? And then 2 mistakes, not immersing myself enough and using the wrong tools for the task. If you thought this was going to be a gear recommendation video, I do apologize. If you'll forgive the self-promotion, of course, I do have courses on the Underdog website. So if you want to learn in a more structured context, go check that out. If you're around Brussels, come see what the classroom has to offer as well. What advice would you give people starting their music production journey in 2026? Are there any mistakes that you feel you'd like to warn beginners about upfront? Leave that in the comments because I'd love to know more. Subscribe to the channel, and until next time, stay producing, be good to each other, and take care. Bye-bye.